So my name is Laila Abou Hana, and that's my classmate, Victor. And we're gonna ask you like a couple of questions. That would take like around 25 to 30 minutes. Is that fine with you?
Mhm.
And before we start, how would you like us to address you?
You can just call me Robin.
Robin? Okay, that's good. So the first question is, what inspires you to focus on functional and integrative nutrition?
Uh, you know, I discovered integrative and functional medicine the same way I think most practitioners have, which was I had my own personal health struggles and was not able to find any answers or help within the conventional medicine paradigm. Saw a lot of different doctors who, quite frankly, dismissed all of my concerns or steered me in a direction that I just knew was not correct.
Mhm.
So I kind of did some research and did some digging, did some learning on my own, and found an integrative medicine doctor
Mhm.
who really sat down and listened. And that sort of helped me start to get better. So it was a long journey of seeing different practitioners and different kinds of things to unwind what was going on. But it was very clear from the beginning that I wasn't going to get where I wanted to go with the conventional medicine modalities.
Mhm.
I needed somebody who was thinking of the body as a whole and understood the concept of subclinical issues that rise up where the function of different pathways or different systems aren't working ideally, how that looks in the body, and then what needs to do to restore function to those systems, even in the absence of something diagnosable. And that is really the heart of integrative medicine to me.
That's interesting.
Great,
Victor.
yeah. And I know you studied at you went to New York, right? New York University. So
I
that's
did, I went to NYU for undergraduate. I was originally a biology major because I was really interested in science. I liked it so
yeah,
much.
yeah,
So I studied chemistry and biology, but what I didn't anticipate was that I was going to be in the pre-med classes. And they were so competitive, and it was not really what I wanted to do. So I was kind of
right.
killing myself doing this coursework in such a competitive environment to get to something that I wasn't really that interested in. And it wasn't until somebody, just some random guy, was like, well, what are you going to do? Work at a lab? And I
Right,
was kind of
right,
like, oh, what am I going to do? Maybe I don't want to do any of that. So I started thinking about other options, and I thought about nutrition. I took a class, an intro to nutrition class.
Mhm.
Truthfully, I hated it, but I think it was more the professor than anything
Mhm.
else.
right.
It wasn't that interested in, but it's something inside just kind of nagged at me of like, no, this is good, this is good. And when I looked at the prerequisite courses, I
Mhm.
realized that all of the biology and chemistry classes and the classes that I had already took would count towards the major. And
Which
so
makes it easier.
that really made a very big difference. So I didn't have to start from scratch if I was going to go into a different direction. And so, I met with the department head, really liked her, and decided to declare a nutrition major. And once I was in those classes, I loved it.
Okay.
Took anatomy and biology
Yeah.
outside of the medical school
Mhm.
tracked more in, guided towards nutrition degrees, and like loved that, loved, even loved organic chemistry, like loved it,
That's my favorite.
vitamins and minerals and all that kind of stuff. So it was a really good fit. When I got to the end of that,
Mhm.
um I don't really like hospitals so much.
Yeah.
And so I didn't want to go into clinical. And NYU has a very traditional clinical program.
Right,
And
right,
so I was kind of like, I don't really want to do that. And so I found out from a classmate who had an internship in public relations for a
right.
PR firm who was doing nutrition communications. And that sounded interesting to me. So I actually went that route, and I had a career in nutrition communications and public relations for about 10 years before I decided that I wanted to come back, do a master's, do the dietetic internship program to become a registered dietitian,
Mm-hmm.
and go from that route. So it was during my PR career where I started to be unwell,
Yeah.
a lot of health struggles that I couldn't figure out. And by the time I was at the end of those 10 years, I knew that I wanted to go back, get my master's, get the conventional training done, but go into integrative and functional nutrition. At
Mhm.
that time, there wasn't any programs that existed, very few.
Yeah.
And one that did exist wasn't very rigorous.
Mm-hmm.
So it really was kind of piecing together my own education through different conferences, finding the right kinds of mentors, and Dr. Jean was one of them. And
That also ties into the next question I was going to ask. So,
mhm.
who were some of your mentors that shaped your approach into this field? Some key moments that really inspired you?
Well, the first functional doctor who I saw, that was a really big pivotal moment because I remember listening to her lecture at a conference.
Right.
Um, and she was describing this constellation of symptoms, and I recognized myself in that constellation of symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
From that moment, I felt really hopeful. I was like, oh, she knows what's happening, and so therefore she can help me.
Yeah.
And she referred me to a nutritionist in her practice who became a close friend and mentor. Dr. Sheila Dean became a close friend and mentor. So did Kathy Swift. And I joined an organization called Dietitians in Integrative Functional Medicine within the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. And being a member of the executive committee there brought me into the fold with all of these incredible functional dietitians who were really interested in guiding me and helping me and helping me learn and refine my practice and fine tune my skills. Because at the time, there wasn't really that many young people who were being attracted to the field. And so I had everybody's attention, which was really fortunate. It was me and maybe two or three other young dietitians. And, we had access to everyone, all the best brains. And so that was really fortunate timing for me.
That's great.
Nice. Nice.
Well, the second question is, how do you tailor evidence-based practice to meet individual needs?
I mean, it depends, the evidence-based practice is a broad term.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, everything that we're doing is evidence-based.
Yes.
So where there's published data, we're pulling from published data. Where there's an understanding of either a metabolic process or like some kind of methodology, we're looking at that and thinking about that. And then there's also clinical experience,
Mm-hmm.
where if you've been seeing things consistently and your colleagues are seeing things consistently, maybe it's not gold standard as far as evidence-based, but it is evidence. And it's important also to keep in mind that, what practitioners are doing in practice, the time it takes for something like that to become more mainstream is at least 10 years, but really sometimes longer, more like 15. So you definitely want to have a good understanding of how the body works so
Mm-hmm.
that you can decide whether or not something makes sense. And you want to rely on published data where it exists. And case studies can be really helpful also. But it's also important to keep an open mind and to keep your curiosity open and have a good network of people who you can discuss cases with, or if you're getting stuck or you're seeing things that are confusing. It's important to have a network so you can see who else is doing what, how are they approaching it, and are they getting results? Because that's evidence-based too.
That actually makes sense. So, yeah, Victor,
All right. Moving on
on
to
to
the
the
next
next question.
question. Could you share a case that impacted your approach to helping clients?
I mean, all of them. All of them.
Maybe one that was so complex that gave you a new perspective or more in depth.
There's always clients along the way. It's usually the ones, it's sometimes the ones who you can't help that teach you the most,
Right.
funny enough. Because there's a few women in particular, there's three who I'm thinking of. One, she was so stuck in her progress and she was really reactive to all of these different kinds of foods.
Mhm.
And this was probably 10 years ago, something like that.
Mhm.
Now, if she came into my clinical practice or many other clinical practices, I feel like we would know what to do with her now, but no one really was discussing these kinds of things then. And she's really bright, did a ton of research. And I remember she said, like, I don't want you to think I'm nuts, but I feel like I have a sensitivity to, I think she said salicylates. And I was like, well, I don't think that's nuts. Tell me why you think that. And we kind of like refined it and refined it. She would eat certain foods and become very flushed. It turned out she was having a histamine reaction. And
Okay.
so histamines, we didn't know it then. We thought it was salicylates, but it was
Mhm.
histamines. Really, that was the issue. And then, you go on a deep dive and you try to learn about what might do that. And I found something that might help. And we tried it and it helped, but it didn't fix. Ultimately, I felt like the doctor that we were both working under she just kept on doing the same thing over and over again. We weren't getting anywhere. So I actually recommended that she see someone else. But I stayed in touch with her. And I wanted to know what that other doctor did that worked. And what she did was treat the woman more aggressively for Lyme disease and treated her for intestinal parasites. And that really tipped me off to the role of intestinal parasites as a big target for why people are resistant to the types of treatments and plans that work for others. And so now that's something that I specialize in. There was another woman she weighed nothing. She was so thin and she was eating, but everything made her sick. Everything made her bloat. And you look at her and she looks very eating disordered, but
Mhm.
that wasn't her issue. And so she was getting bounced around and dismissed because she was so thin and frail and unable to eat, but not unwilling to eat. And so, we tried to navigate that as best we can. I think if I saw her now, I would understand things in a different way. And then that brings me to the most recent, very successful case. There was a woman who came into my practice, a young woman in her late 20s, incredibly sick. Uh, she had gained 30 pounds in a year without changing any of her habits. She was in terrible pain, back and hip and joint pain, and needed to walk with a cane. Um, and she had this really weird symptom of her tongue was 4 times the size as a normal tongue. It was just incredibly swollen. And she would have these episodes of unknown trigger where her tongue would swell even more and block her breathing. So she'd have to go to the hospital. And they'd give, the Benadryl and all of those kinds of allergy type medicines. None of that worked for this. So it wasn't an allergy and no one really knew what to make of it. And she was really at the end of her rope. She had been diagnosed with psoriatic arthritis, so we knew that there was that. She had developed what looked like an allergy to dark leafy greens and avocado, a deathly allergy that was reproducible, but it didn't show up on any blood labs. So that was weird. And the rheumatologist who she was seeing kind of was at the end of his list of ideas, and he thought maybe the next step would be like a low dose chemotherapy. And her and her fiance decided that like that was not what they were going to do. They happened to meet one of my existing clients who was her physical therapist. And that physical therapist was like, you can't be in conventional medicine anymore. You're not going to get anywhere. You should call Robin. So we got on the phone and she asked if I thought I could help. And truthfully, I didn't know, but I thought that I could take a shot and just sort of express to her my concerns of like, we don't know what's triggering these responses that seem like allergies. And I'm worried that if I do something and you land in the hospital, like we have to be clear that we don't know how to avoid that. And she was really willing to accept the risk, and therefore I was willing to accept the risk. And the thing that stood out to me was the tongue and the swelling in her neck, not thyroid though, in the neck. And I kept on thinking, maybe we need to move her lymph. And so I gave her some supplementation to move lymph. And I found these tongue exercises that you could do to move the lymph in the tongue and in the mouth. And it started to work.
Wow.
The tongue started to shrink. So we were like, okay. This woman grew up in Bermuda, which apparently is known for using really, really toxic pesticides that are outlawed in the United States. So she said that a lot of her relatives were very sick. A lot of people have fibromyalgia. There's a lot of, her dad has early onset Parkinson's. Like there's a lot of illness on that island. And no one really knows why. So I ran what's called a total toxic burden panel. I thought we were going to find mold. When somebody says that they gained 30 pounds without changing their habits, that to me is a tip off for mold. So that's what I thought we were going to find. We in fact did not find significant mold in her system, but we did find huge levels of uranium, among other toxins. And, uranium doesn't come up often on people's tests, but the sickest people test positive for uranium. It's just an observation, and I don't really know why. And we don't really know all of the, like, where is it coming from? We don't really know. I've heard that it can be from well water. And she did say that in Bermuda, they drink well water there, and they collect rainwater and drink well water. So that was our best guess. So our next big step was, I pulled gluten from her diet because I thought it would just be inflammatory. I pulled dairy, and I pulled added sugar. I thought, because of the severity of her symptoms, that we'd have to do something like an autoimmune protocol style diet, but I knew she didn't have it in her to dive directly into that. So we started with just sort of like the basics there. Eat more fruits and vegetables, pull out these foods, balance blood sugar, basic stuff, more antioxidants, stop drinking alcohol, stop smoking cigarettes, those kinds of things. She smoked a lot of pot because that's how she managed pain. And in Bermuda, apparently they also sprinkle tobacco in with the pot when they smoke it. So once I realized that, I was like, okay, you have to stop smoking pot or stop smoking tobacco. So we took that out. We do the best we could. So I started to detox her. And then we ran a tick-borne panel, because one of the things that she said that really stood out in my mind when I took her history, the biggest, most important thing in integrative medicine is that it allows for us to take a very detailed history, because everything you need to know, your patient's going to tell you. You just have to be in tuned and listen and know when they're telling you something that's very, very important, that it needs to raise a red flag for you. So my initial consult with people is at least an hour and a half, sometimes longer. I think it was longer with her, because there was so much to delve into. And one of the things that she said that stood out to me was that she was a ballet dancer, and she had incredible flexibility, and she moved to New York because she was going to be a dancer, and, enrolled in one of the top schools, the ballet schools. And then she went on a family trip to Vermont and got a flu there. And after the flu, she lost all flexibility in her hips and low back. And she had to stop dancing because she was stiff. And that was when the pain started. So I tested her for tick-borne infection and found Lyme disease and Bartonella. That made sense. So now we have something that accounts for the pain. So we have the inflammation from infection inflammation from uranium, among other toxins. Uranium is insanely inflammatory to the system, very destabilizing to cells. So that's really important. We found some miscellaneous gut infections, nothing major. We switched the diet so that it'll be more anti-inflammatory. And then went in and started dealing with all of these infections and burdens, with the ultimate goal of passing her on to a really good tick-borne disease doctor, but she wouldn't have been able to tolerate the protocol with all that swelling and allergic response and all that stuff. And once we made it to a critical mass, those things were not happening anymore. She lost 30 pounds without even trying. It was just gluten-free, dairy. She thought it was because of gluten-free, dairy-free, and no sugar. That wasn't why. It was because we were moving her lymph and detoxing her and binding to toxins and helping her eliminate.
All together.
We were using sauna. She did everything. The other thing that was significant in her case was the psoriatic arthritis, which really was Lyme disease, acting as psoriatic arthritis. Usually the skin rashes are the last thing to clear, and that was true here too. But she was a warrior type client where she was ready to really dedicate everything to her healing with the objective for her was not just to get better, and this really broke my heart when we first spoke. She was getting married in a year. She had to bump that out. She's actually getting married next year.
Oh,
And she was like, I just want to dance at my wedding. And that was so heartbreaking. And that, it's such a pure intention. And so, I was like, okay, we can do that. We've got a whole year. Let's make sure that you can dance at your wedding. And so, like I said, she dropped 30 pounds. She thought it was from the diet. It wasn't just from the diet. It was everything. She was brave enough to delve into a significant history of sexual abuse. And what was interesting was that the psoriatic rashes were in private places. It was at her underwear line. It was around her throat. And it was these areas of physical vulnerability on her body. It was very literal. And so we made sure that she was with a good therapist, working with a good therapist. I had her do other modalities for trauma release and, tagged other practitioners to help with these kinds of things that are so significant when people get really sick. Complex cases will always have elements of trauma, infections, and toxins. So she did remarkably well. She stopped drinking completely. She recognized that drinking was, affecting her mood in a very negative way, giving her anxiety, giving her depression. She realized that if she had an argument with someone, her tongue started to swell. And so we were talking about things like throat chakra, like you kind of weave in these elements of ancient wisdom and you're like, oh my God, her throat chakra is blocked. Well, I don't know what to do about that, but I know someone who does. So
that's a good point too. I think because Laila, I think you wanted to bring up question. There's a specific question the professor wanted, number 7.
yes,
You want to
which
bring that one?
is how do you balance integrative approach with traditional advice?
um it's sort of the traditional approach and then some. So for instance, if you have somebody with blood sugar dysregulation, you just do that, you balance their blood sugar. But I remember thinking that, I thought we were all on the same page about balancing blood sugar and what do you do? But I had an internship at a really good, prestigious program, had a dietetic internship who when she listened in on me counseling someone on, protein is the anchor and that's how you anchor the carbohydrate so your blood sugar doesn't raise. And I have this whole analogy of the anchor and the balloon, and the carb is the balloon and the protein is the anchor. And that's how you keep it from, bumping up and crashing down. And I was shocked that she didn't know. She was just sort of like, oh, wow, that's incredible. How did you know that? And I was like, that's weird. Is it not in your textbook?
Right.
So these are the things where I was like, is that integrative? I don't think it is. I think it's conventional that just kind of got disregarded.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of, you know, the foundation of a lot of things is already is in conventional medicine. Conventional medicine is very happy to adopt the concept of a Mediterranean diet. But really, like, there's so many different communities in the Mediterranean, and they're not all eating the same diet. So what is it that we're actually talking about when we talk about the Mediterranean diet? And it really comes down to, as far as conventional medicine is concerned and conventional dietetics, is about like monounsaturated polyphenols. So it's sort of like the monounsaturated fatty acids and olive oil and the, you know, polyphenols in foods and antioxidant foods. And all of that is right and true. But when you dig down a little deeper, it's the, you know, community engagement. It's, you know, no one's in you have to look at the decades. I think they say that the true Mediterranean diet is like pre-1950s or something like that. There's a decade where they started industrializing the food system the same way that we do here. So you have to think about timeline. But, you know, in the 1950s in the Mediterranean, nobody was really eating alone. People were eating together. Everything was mostly homemade. They were eating as close to nature as intended. There wasn't a lot of processed foods. The processed foods that did exist didn't have a bunch of chemicals and preservatives and colors in them. They probably weren't even homogenizing the milk. Maybe they were pasteurizing, but they were not homogenizing it. Everything was local. Everything was sustainable. There weren't factory farms. It's a different culture. So whereas conventional medicine, conventional perspectives will accept the concept of Mediterranean diet, it's sort of
Okay.
different.
What skills do you see as essential for new dietitians today?
An open mind.
Mhm.
And that's really it, an open mind. I see a lot of young dietitians who you know, there's healthy skepticism, which I think is very important, and we should all exercise healthy skepticism. But sometimes it's borderline closed-minded, and I think that we all have to have an understanding that, you know, the programs that we're taught in the universities are always going to be behind in what people are doing in practice because they're not in the field. And so it's a good thing to move away from absolutes, because anytime anything is framed in absolutes, you know that it's not scientifically valid. There's no absolutes in science because we're always learning and we're always experimenting, and, you know, there's no limit to what there is to learn. So I think an open mind is probably the most important.
Thank you so
Awesome.
much. That's a great answer.
Yes. Thank you very much for your time, Robin.
You're
Uh,
welcome.
really appreciate it. It was insightful. It was interesting, and your whole story is great. And yeah, thank you. Maybe we'll stay in contact with you in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope that this was helpful.
Thank
It
you
was.
so
It
much.
was.
It definitely was.
Okay, good. Take care.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Have a
Take
great
care.
one. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.